And now a choice of viewing on BBC television. Just started on BBC Two, the semi-final episode 3 of Kierkegaard's Journal, starring Richard Chamberlain, Peggy Mount, and Blake Bremner. And on BBC One, Ethel the Frog. Good evening. On Ethel the Frog tonight, we look at violence. The violence of British gangland. Last Tuesday, a reign of terror was ended when the notorious Piranha Brothers, Doug and Dinsdale, after one of the most extraordinary trials in British legal history, were sentenced to 400 years imprisonment for crimes of violence. Tonight, Ethel the Frog examines the rise to power of the Piranhas, the methods they use to subjugate rival gangs, and their subsequent tracking down and capture by the brilliant Superintendent Harry Snapper Organs of Cuba Division. Doug and Dinsdale Piranha were born on probation in this house in Kipling Road, Southwark. The eldest sons in a family of 16. Their father, Arthur Piranha, a scrap metal dealer and TV quizmaster, was well known to the police and a devout Catholic. In January 1928, he had married Katie Malone, an up-and-coming East End boxer. Doug was born in February 1929, and Dinsdale 2 weeks later, and again a week after that. Their next-door neighbor was Mrs. April Simnel. Kipling Road was this typical sort of East End street. People were in and out of each other's houses with each other's property all day long. They were cheery out there. Was it a terribly violent area? Yes. Cheerful and violent. I remember Doug was very keen on boxing until he learned to walk. Then he took up putting the boot in the groin. Oh, he was very interested in that. His mother used to have such trouble getting him to come in for his tea. He'd be out there putting his little boot in, bless him. Kids were very different then. They didn't have their heads filled with all this Cartesian dualism. At the age of 15, Doug and Dinsdale started attending the Ernest Pythagoras Primary School in Clerkenwell. Anthony Viney, you taught the Piranha Brothers English. What do you remember most about them? Anthony Viney. When the Piranha Brothers left school, they were called up, but were found by an army board to be too mentally unstable, even for national service. Denied the opportunity to use their talents in the service of their country, they began to operate what they called the Operation. They would select a victim and then threaten to beat him up if he paid them the so-called protection money. 4 months later, they started another operation which they called the Other Operation. In this racket, they selected another victim and threatened not to beat him up if he didn't pay them. 1 month later, they hit upon the other operation. In this, the victim was threatened that if he didn't pay them, they would beat him up. This, for the Piranha Brothers, was a turning point. Doug and Dinsdale Piranha formed a gang which they called the Gang, and used terror to take over nightclubs, billiard halls, gambling casinos, and racetracks. When they tried to take over the MCC, they were, for the only time in their lives, slip a treat. As the empire spread, however, we in Q Division were keeping tabs on their every movement by reading the color supplements. A small-time operator who fell foul of Dinsdale Piranha was Vince Snarton Lewis. Well, one day I was sitting at home threatening the kids, and I looked out of the open wall, saw his tank drive up, and one of Dinsdale's boys gets out, comes up all nice and friendly like, says Dinsdale wants to have a talk with me. So he chains me to the back of the tank, takes me for a scrape round Dinsdale's, and Dinsdale's there in the conversation pit with Doug and Charles Paisley, the baby crusher, and a couple foot producers, and a man they called Kierkegaard who just sat there buying their heads of whippets. And Dinsdale said, I hear you been a naughty boy, Clement. And he splits me nostrils open, saws me leg off, and pulls me liver out. I said, my name's not Clement. And then he loses his temper and nails me head to the floor. He nailed your head to the floor. At first, yeah. Another man who had his head nailed to the floor was Stego Tracy. Stig, I've been told that Dinsdale Piranha nailed your head to the floor. No, never. He was a smashing bloke. He used to give his mother flowers and that. He was like a brother to me. But the police have film of Dinsdale actually nailing your head to the floor. Oh, yeah, well, he did that, yeah. Why? Well, he had to. I mean, be fair. There's nothing else he could do. I mean, I had transgressed the unwritten law. What had you done? Well, he never told me that, but he gave me his word that was the case. And that's good enough for me, little Dinsy. I mean, he didn't want to nail my head to the floor. I had to insist. He wanted to let me off. There's nothing Dinsdale wouldn't do for you. And you don't bear him any grudge? A grudge? Oh, Dinsy. He was a real darling. I understand you also nailed your wife's head to a coffee table. Isn't that right, Mrs. Tracy? Oh, no. Yeah, well, he did do that. Yeah. He was a cruel man, but fair. Vince, after he nailed your head to the floor, did you ever see him again? Yeah. After I used to go round to his flat every Sunday, lunchtime, apologize. We'd shake hands, and he'd nail my head to the floor. Every Sunday? Yeah, but he was very reasonable by it. I mean, one Sunday, when my parents would come in round for tea, I asked him if he'd mind very much not nailing my head to the floor that week. And he agreed and just screwed me pelvis to a cake stand. He's the only friend I ever had. Lovely fella. Clearly, Dinsdale was inspired tremendous loyalty and terror amongst his business associates. But what was he really like? I walked out with Dinsdale on many occasions and found him a most charming and erudite companion. He was wont to introduce one to many eminent persons, celebrated American singers, members of the aristocracy, and other gang leaders. How had he met them? Through his work for charity. He took a warm interest in boys' clubs, sailors' homes, coasters' associations, scouting jamborees, and of course, the household cavalry. Was there anything unusual about him? I should say not. Dinsdale was a perfectly normal person in every way, except inasmuch as he was convinced that he was being stalked by a giant hedgehog, to whom he referred as Spiny Norman. How big was Norman supposed to be? Normally, he was wont to be about 12 feet from snout to tail, but when Dinsdale was very depressed, Norman could be anything up to 800 yards long. When Norman was about, Dinsdale would go very quiet, and his nose would swell up, and his teeth would start moving about, and he'd become very violent, and claim that he'd laid Stanley Baldwin. Dinsdale was a gentleman, and what's more, he knew how to treat a female impersonator. It's easy for us to judge Dinsdale too harshly. After all, he only did what most of us simply dream of doing. Sorry. After all, a murder is only an inverted suicide. An extroverted suicide. Dinsdale was a loony, but he was a happy loony. Lucky bastard. Most of these strange tales concern Dinsdale, but what of Doug? One man who met him was Luigi Riccati. Well, I've been running a successful escort agency, I-Class. No, really, I-Class girls. We didn't have any of that. That was right out. And I decided, excuse me. Hello? No, not now. Storm. Right. Yes, we'll have the watch ready for you at midnight. The watch. The Chinese watch. Yes. Righto. Bye-bye, mother. Anyway, I decided then to open up an I-Class nightclub for the gentry at Biggleswade with international cuisine, cooking, top-line acts, and not a cheap clip joint for picking up tots. That was right out. I deny it completely. And one night, Dinsdale walked in with a couple of big lads, one of whom was carrying a tactical nuclear missile. They said I bought one of their fruit machines, and would I pay for it? How much did they want? £750,000. Then they went out. Why didn't you call for the police? Well, I noticed that the lad with the thermonuclear device was the chief constable for the area. Anyway, a week later, they came back, said the check had bounced, and I had to see Doug. Doug. I was terrified of him. Everyone was terrified of Doug. I've seen grown men pull their own heads off rather than see Doug. Even Dinsdale was frightened of Doug. What do you do? He used sarcasm. He knew all the tricks. Dramatic irony, metaphor, pathos, puns, parody, light touches, and satire. By a combination of violence and sarcasm, the Piranha Brothers, by February 1966, controlled London and the Southeast. In February, though, Dinsdale made a big mistake. Latterly, Dinsdale had become increasingly worried about spying Norman. He had come to the conclusion that Norman slept in an airplane hangar in Luton Airport. And so, on February 22nd, 1966, at Luton Airport, even the police began to sit up and take notice. The Piranhas realized they had gone too far, and the time was on. They went into hiding, and they decided on a solo approach, viz. Some form of disguise, as the old leather and boots were a bit of a giveaway. Luckily, my years with Bristol Rep stood me in good stead, as I assumed a bewildering variety of disguises. I tracked them to Cardiff, posing as the Reverend Smile Egret. Hearing they'd gone back to London, I assumed the identity of a pork butcher, Brian Stokes. On my arrival in London, I discovered they had returned to Cardiff. I followed as Gloucester from King Lear. Acting on a hunch, I spent several months in Buenos Aires as Blind Pew, returning through Panama Canal as Ratty and Toad Hall. Back in Cardiff, I relived my triumph as Sancho Panza in Man of La Mancha, which the Bristol Evening Post described as a glittering performance of rare perception, although the Bath Chronicle was less than enthusiastic. In fact, he gave me a right patting. I quote, as per the performance of Superintendent Harry Snapper Organs of Sancho Panza, the audience were bemused by his high-pitched Welsh accent and intimidated by his abusive ad-libs. The Western Daily News said, Sancho Panza, Mr. Organs, spoiled an otherwise impeccably choreographed rape scene by his unscheduled appearance and persistent cries of, "What's all this, then?" "No mind, Snapper, love, you can't win them all." "True, Constable. Grab my eyeliner, please." "Telegram for you, love." "Good-o, it's from Binky. Those flowers are for Sergeant Lardia from the German waiting outside." "Oh, good." 30 seconds, Superintendent. "Oh, blimey, I'm on. Is me on straight, Constable?" "Oh, it's fine." "Right, here we go then, Hawkins." "Oh, mad, Superintendent." "Good luck then." "Read all about it. Beelzebub's escape." Whew. Dinsdale. 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 Dinsdale.